Hello, beautiful people. Hello, 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 hello. We have landed. Extending a warm welcome to each and every one of you. Welcome to the Embodied Lab 2-Day Trauma Healing Summit. My name is Oyemi Kalimaat, and I am currently on Monacan land, which is colonially known as Buckingham, Virginia. And I will be your host for this session titled Resisting the Seduction of Trauma with Nkem Ndefo. And if you haven't had the pleasure of being in Nkem's presence, be prepared to be mind blown because he is amazing. So just wanted to extend land acknowledgement before we start. As our community gathers today from various corners of the globe, we would like to acknowledge that the land we live and work on is the traditional territory of many indigenous people who respectfully honor their people, cultures, and traditions. With that, I am going to go ahead and invite Nkem here to join me. I'm going to spotlight her. There we go. So everybody can see us as I read her bio and you guys can get to know a little bit about her. Nkem Ndefo brings an abundance of experience as a clinician, educator, consultant, and community strategist to innovative programs that address stress and trauma and build resilience for individuals, organizations, and communities across sectors throughout the US and internationally. She is particularly interested in working alongside people most impacted by violence and marginalization. So with that, help me welcome Nkem.
Thank you so much, Oyemi, for the warm welcome. Let's see if I can live up to the expectations here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is always so beautiful to, just as Oyemi said, to see us from all across the globe, all across time zones, how we're able to come and create connection here. And if the sound feels a little garbled to you, I say thank you so much, David. I recommend turning on the closed captions. That my internet is probably as best as it's going to get right now. Thank you. And before we jump in, I'd love to start with a connecting practice. And the connecting practice is a way to, one, help us drop in and connect to ourselves and then connect to each other. And it's a way to kind of just touch into, which we'll see later in the session, about if our stress activation or even possible trauma activation is appropriate or useful right now. So I'm going to use a set of guiding questions that I use from the Resilience Toolkit right here, right now. And the first question is what is your stress state right now? And this is just for you internally, just turning in, what is your stress state right now? Low, medium, high, 1 to 10, or maybe a weather pattern. Is it stormy? Is it clear skies? Is it oppressive heat? Is it a lightning storm? And then the second question, how do you know? How do you know that's what your state is internally right now? What are the cues mentally, emotionally, physically? And the third question, is your state useful for you right now in this moment? Is the amount of activation that you're carrying useful for you right now in this moment, sitting in front of a Zoom or listening, watching, hoping to probably learn something? Or are you carrying more than you need? And perhaps you're unsure. So if you're carrying more than you need, or you're perhaps unsure, I'm going to invite you into a practice and self-observe what happens when you practice. Turning your attention again inwards, scanning your physical body for what feels the best in this moment. What feels the best in this moment inside? It might feel wonderful and free, light, solid, settled. It might be just neutral. And if you're carrying a lot of pain, it might be just an area of less pain. Find the sensation that feels the best in this moment and turn your attention inwards. Let your attention linger on that sensation, noticing its depth, how widely it spreads. And as your attention lingers there, notice what happens with your stress activation. If it increases, probably better to do something else. But if your stress starts to settle, how do you know? What are the signs that the activation is starting to settle? Yeah. So please, noting that shift. If it worked for you, do you feel more connected to yourself? Do you feel more connected to the present moment? Did the thoughts still a little bit? Is the colors brighter? Are the sounds louder or more clear? Can you feel your body, that you actually have a body? Welcome, right? And the quick note about that is that if you feel more settled, you feel more, your breath is easier, your muscles released in some kind of way, then what that is an indication is right before we practiced, you were carrying more stress than you needed and you let it go. Okay, great. Connected. Oyemi, could you mute? Thank you so much. Okay. All right, folks. So I kind of debated whether I was going to use this title. I was like, ugh, about this idea of resisting the seduction of trauma porn, but it's something that I think we need to talk about. Because I see so much damage happening. So many people say it's like a kind of a, it's fashionable to say it's trauma informed. I'm trauma informed. I'm doing a trauma informed this or that, as if we just talking about trauma makes you trauma informed. And there is unfortunately a lot of damage being done in the name of trauma informed, being done poorly. And I really think I call it trauma porn. It's trauma pornography. And so I want to first say that what is trauma, right? Like we're all here, but I think that there are many definitions. And I want to, the simplest term is this idea of, and if you have questions, with this many people here, put the questions will get lost in the chat. I will keep my eye on the chat and try to interact the best I can, but we got a lot of folks here, which is beautiful. If you have a question that you would like answered at the official Q&A time towards the end, put it in the Q&A box at the bottom ribbon. And I'll even take some questions live orally, right? And Alejandra asks, what is trauma informed? Trauma informed, I mean, again, many people think if I just talk about trauma, it's trauma informed. Trauma informed is a very specific approach. I use approach called embodied, trauma informed and resilience oriented, or ETRO, the letter E and then TIRO. And what it is some one, being aware of trauma and the capacity for recovery. being able to recognize when trauma shows up, preventing re-traumatization. And it's also about incorporating not just how you individually move, it's in a system or an organization or a program. It's incorporating these certain set of principles and understanding into your policies, your procedures, and your practices. And there's 6 core principles, principle clusters for a trauma-informed approach. And they include safety, trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration and mutuality, peer support, voice, choice, and self-agency, and lastly, cultural humility. So if something is not culturally responsive, does not aware of historical and gender history, can't be trauma informed just because you talk about trauma. The voice, choice, and self-agency is huge. How many things I see that are people say this is trauma informed. We're going to be doing some mindfulness practices and they say, close your eyes and you're going to breathe, and we're going to breathe and I'm going to count to 4 or I'm going to count to 6. Where's my choice? What if having my eyes closed is traumatizing to me because I'm having a flashback? Was there any choice as opposed to an invitation? I invite you, eyes open or eyes closed. I invite you, right? Like, do you hear the choice in that? So just simple things where we think, oh, if we're doing a mindfulness practice, it's instantly trauma informed. It is not. Okay, that is completely not what I was going to talk about, but we went down there because I wanted to answer your question, Alejandra. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. It'll be much easier to track for me. Thank you so much. So what is trauma? Trauma is simply too much, too fast, or too little for too long. And it includes both experiences like events, but it also includes the conditions of our lives, like poverty, like racism, like cis heteropatriarchy. There's many different conditions that can produce trauma. And they usually, the idea is, it's not just that it's something we've experienced. It can also be something that we perceive. Because if we perceive it, in many ways, it's real to us. And so we can't tell somebody else what is traumatic or not traumatic for them. This is something that is self-defined for individuals and communities. It's the experience of being overwhelmed, or perception that something and feeling of something and then feeling overwhelmed. And it overwhelms our usual coping. And so what I want to see here as we move to talking about what is trauma porn, the experience of being overwhelmed is not relieved when we tell our trauma story. If we were overwhelmed in the original experience or the perception of the experience, or we were overwhelmed in the original conditions, when we retell it, we will be overwhelmed again. Without any new resources, either internal or external resources, telling the story again will overwhelm us. And so I want to use a metaphor here that I use often, but I think it really helps it come alive. And this is this idea that, or metaphor of, if you saw somebody drowning, you don't stand at the shore and see someone drowning and say, swim a little deeper. You don't tell someone who's drowning, swim a little deeper. What do? We may go out there and try to save them. We may throw a rope. We may call for help. but we help to bring somebody out of that condition of the drowning to shore. Right? And that is, it is the metaphor, right? When we're overwhelmed, that feeling of trauma can be like drowning. And I think so often people go to therapy, psychotherapy, and they're told what? Tell me your story. Sometimes we go to our friends, our network, our family, and we tell the story. We go into a healing circle and we tell the story. And the question is, do you know how to swim before you tell the story, or are you repeating the drowning? We need to learn how to swim. Yeah. And so telling our stories can be very, very healing, but we only when you know how to swim. If you are drowning again, if there's no new resources, this is what is the problem. And so trauma porn, right, is the telling of the story without the new resources, where we have a tendency to re-experience. Sometimes it's telling the story to cause an increase in arousal in us or other people. Sometimes trauma porn is specifically about exploitation. And sometimes it's about trauma bonding. So what's happening here? What's happening here? I want to talk a little bit about it, and then I want to talk about the why, the what and the why, the mechanisms and the manifestations, both. And then I'll get into a little bit about what is the healing? What is the healing side? And then how do we prepare to do it so that we are not stuck in these cycles of trauma pornography? We're not stuck in the cycles of re-experiencing. So what's happening? What's happening with the re-experiencing? And this is Josh asking this question. Is it always overwhelming for each and every person that retells the story? Absolutely not. But are you even asking the question? And this is the problem, is I don't think the question is asked often enough. So people just assume if I tell my story, even if I understand my story, that's enough. I wish it was the case. Because we've told our stories and like we'd all be healed, right? I wish that was the case. Okay. So what's happening with the re-experiencing? One of trauma's superpowers is its ability to pierce time. Trauma is a time traveler. This is where the past intrudes on the present, and actually the present controls our future. Time collapses. And it's as if the event is happening now. That's one of your big indicators that you're re-experiencing. It feels, when you're telling the story, as if it is happening now. One of the biggest ones. It feels alive. Okay. And what you can see, even, it's so much, is that when, and it's actually, we use it for certain therapies, is when someone tells a story that has that kind of activation, is that their eyes will have what we call an eye scan path that will travel the same direction in the same order as when the original event happened. Our eyes will travel. So if something happened, we had a car accident, or something happened on the right, and our eyes will travel and we will be looking in the same direction. That is like literally the re-experiencing. What's happening is that this is held in our implicit memory. It's our unconscious and automatic memory. Okay. And it is, I want to think, for example, let's say I was seated and in a car, and I was at a stop, and a car came behind and hit me. And I was looking up in the mirror when I saw it coming. It's literally as I sit and I tell the story, oh, I was sitting in the car and then this happened and then this happened. My eyes will go up in the same way and my body re-experiences it in an unconscious way. My muscles will brace in the same way, my blood flow, right? My heartbeat, I will literally be re-experiencing it as I'm telling it. And what it does is it actually reinforces the trauma experience. There's some thought that this is what whiplash is after, like, you sort of wonder, I had a small accident, but suddenly I have so much pain. What's happening in that? That is actually me re-experiencing it over and over again. Every time I tell it, my body re-experiences it and I start to grow sore from the muscle contraction and the bracing and the changes in my autonomic nervous system. So in the telling, we reinforce the experience. So we were thinking, right? So this is what, see how damaging this can be. And you can actually see a generalization happen. So I once worked with a client many, many years ago who experienced childhood sexual abuse. She came from a very wealthy family and she experienced it. They had a specific gardener who came to tend to the roses. And he was a perpetrator. So it became the smell of the roses, right? Anytime she would tell the story, the smell of the roses would, right? She would have this flashback, really, this re-experiencing. And it started to generalize because of so much repetition. Anytime she saw roses, it was a problem. Roses can come in a bouquet with other flowers. Other flowers became a problem. And so her re-experiencing from the telling of the story actually started to generalize until more and more things became triggers for her. And I see here Sharon adds, this is when we need to check in with clients, and good therapists would be aware to track their clients. Yes, and many therapists do not have training in tracking. Many therapists are taught in talk modality only. In fact, overwhelmingly, most therapists are taught in talk modality only. And Lydia adds here, we had no training on this. And this is the standard. I know that I was harmed in talk therapy, telling my story over and over again. All the good intentions in the world, but at what point, right? At what point? I had no new resources and I continued to tell the story. Okay. Wangui adds here, hi Wangui, I've had a therapist say to me that they didn't know how to track me. I'm just going to pause for anybody who's been harmed in this process and just, acknowledge the pain of that. I share that with you and it's really painful. And it's one of the reasons that's really spurred me to do the work that I do around tracking, self-tracking and other tracking others. Okay. All right. So what else happens here in this, what I'm calling trauma pornography, is that there are somatic symptoms, soma meaning your body. There's arousal, right? This is actually the term we use. So it's not just when we say, there's the play on words with pornography, we're talking about sexual, erotic arousal. Here we're talking about autonomic or nervous system arousal, actually whole system arousal. It's not just our autonomic nervous systems. We do see sympathetic charge, the sympathetic nervous system. So here, we have adrenaline, a cascade of hormones coursing through our bodies, causing faster heartbeat and faster heart rate. causing us to become over-focused, causing us to have a sense of pressure, of a sense of hurry, a sense of rigidity in our body. Our minds become binary, where we close in, it's one or the other. We become, again, rigid in body and mind, this arousal. There's a sense of doom, a closing in. And even the sense of speeding up and things are urgent, right? We become habituated. We can become habituated, right? We tell the story, we feel this charge and we become habituated to it. Or it can be so extreme that that arousal and we start to shut down and collapse. So instead of a busy mind, right, all the ideas, we go blank. Instead of the speediness, time slows. We get what's called time dilation. We get dreamy, right? And we can become habituated to that and kind of like the dreaminess as the endorphins and the endogenous opioids are floating through our system. Right? So in telling the story, we re-experience. It can be so extreme that we feel unable to move, just like we were unable to move in the original incident. Right? And so see what's happening to our system, right? This is not, it's not benign. It's not just the words. To take our systems through that again and again. And I think sometimes trauma pornography is exploitation. It actually is explicit exploitation. Social media, oh my goodness, how many times people will tell their story so that they get more likes and more follows. And we're glued, right, in the scroll, like we can't look away, because it's not just, right, someone telling their story, it's us listening and being the audience. I think about journalism. So much of what makes journalism spicy is that story where we can't look away. But not only someone had to tell their story again for that, the people reporting on it and the photographers, you talk about the vicarious trauma that reporters and photojournalists and documentary filmmakers have from this. We're just starting to hear folks talk about this. And the audience. My organization, literally, that I run, Lumos Transforms, we literally had a film organization reach out to us to say, we produced a documentary film that not only traumatized our staff that was working on it, the team, but the audience was traumatized in the watching of it, in the premiere. And then I'm going to say nonprofit or NGO fundraising. What happens with this? You trot out the refugee, you trot out the orphan, you trot out, and they tell their story. And what happens? You get donations pouring in. This is pornography, where you exploit somebody's story for clicks, for donations, for views. The person telling the story and those of us witnessing. Additionally, I think we bond, right? We connect around and through our shared trauma. And it's an important place of connection. Misery loves company, we say. But we notice that we have this compulsion to share. So if you notice in yourself that you have a compulsion to share and you keep telling the story over and over again, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and you feel that charge in you, right? And it's actually not, we seek connection. We're mammals. We seek connection with one another. I'm questioning what this connection is, because is it really intimacy? I think it's intensity. It's not intimacy. Intimacy is built over time. And in that, it's almost a false intimacy, because in that intensity, and we share, right? We feel close to somebody, but it doesn't have the consistency and the safety and the trust built in. In fact, there's no trust. We just jump to the story. That's the trauma bond. It's pornography, y'all. We are doing damage. It is not benign. So just notice as I've been talking, what's the charge? Again, some of the guiding questions from the resilience toolkit that I did right at the beginning. What's happening in your own stress and trauma state right now? You feel a little activated? Yeah. How do you know? Is your heart beating faster? Do you feel a little, your shoulders coming up? You feel a little bracing, a little faster? Maybe your eyes are moving a little bit. Yeah. So I'm going to invite you right now. We'll do another practice in the resilience toolkit right now. This is invitational. If it feels more activating, please stop. I'm going to invite you to bring your hands up towards your face so that you're looking at your palms, crossing your hands here with the thumbs. And then this is it's called the butterfly hug, to set that on your chest so that the fingertips are just below your collarbone, just right there. And then to tap one side and then the other, using a pace that feels good to you and the amount of pressure that feels good to you. If it doesn't feel good, stop. That's not the point. Right? I particularly like it with a slower rhythm and more pressure. You might like a light, whatever it is. While you're doing that, notice if you start to settle, how do you know? I just felt my back muscles relax. I can feel my legs more and my breath deepened. You can stop. Whenever you feel that settling, you're done. And this is the importance, we're going to get to it, by the need for quick real-time practices that we can use to settle when we recognize that we're more activated, right? We're more activated than is useful for the moment. Okay. I see there's lots of questions in the chat. There's 13 to be exact. I'm going to talk a little bit more just to do a little more settling for us before I take some questions, okay? So if retelling our story when we're not well resourced can be re-traumatizing, because we're re-experiencing, we're exploiting ourselves or others. What is trauma healing? I think it's really important to define it, to talk about the shape and the contours of what this is. On an individual level, as we start, well, first off, I'm going to say our trauma is healed when we can tell the story and we do not re-experience it in real time. Our trauma is healed when we can tell our story and we do not re-experience it in real time. It is just a fact. As opposed to implicit memory is that unconscious memory. Explicit memory is a fact. Like, I live at this and this address. And so we can say the story. The story is whatever it is that happened to us was terrifying, was super sad, it has all the emotions, but they are facts. It is sad, but I don't have to feel the sadness in that depth when I tell the story. I don't have to feel the terror when I tell that story. It is just a fact. And I have to say, I think of somebody I worked with many years ago who had some traumatic grief around the loss of her mother. And it was so interesting is that we came to this understanding together is that it was, if she wasn't feeling the grief, it meant that the loss of her mother wasn't important. And for her to be able to pull that apart, and say, the loss of my mother is sad. Me re-experiencing the sadness doesn't make it any more important. And this, right, allowed this space for the trauma healing to happen so she could say, I've lost my mother, and not experience the grief in real time in the same way. Okay. So part of on the way to healing trauma, right? So when trauma is healed, some different processes are happening. One is we are able to feel the process of feeling what the intensity was in small quantities that we can metabolize it. Right? We can metabolize it in small quantities. If it's too much, we again are overwhelmed again, too much, too fast. We often need to, if there was a sense of being frozen or powerless, we need to mobilize. We need to have to be able to feel power. There's a repatterning that has to happen. So many people, part of the narrative around trauma porn and the telling of the story is the mistaken belief in catharsis. Catharsis is this idea that I have this quantity of trauma in me and I can just get it out. If I can just get out all the grief, if I can just cry all the tears, if I can just rage all the rage, right? If I can just get it out of my body, I'll be done. I wish it worked that way. It does not. Trauma is healed in repatterning, changing how the experience is held. It is not a quantity that needs to get out. Healing trauma involves accessing resources, internal resources of strength, right? Wisdom, external resources as well of support and trust. Julia asked, is catharsis re-traumatizing? Yes. Can it be beneficial? No. No. You would be fine. So many people say, like, think about all the times you dumped it out. Are you done? No, actually, right? Repatterning, reframing can be, but reframing is a cognitive process. Trauma doesn't just happen in our brains, it happens in our whole beings. Repatterning is, we're talking also soma, not just mentation. Okay. And so I was speaking on an individual level. Trauma just doesn't happen on an individual level. Trauma also happens at a collective level, at systems levels, and they are intertwined. They are not, you cannot separate them. So when I look at, I'm going to use myself as an example. I look at myself, I am a Black, cisgendered, right? Mildly disabled person. And I experienced childhood trauma that included patriarchy and racism, right? Intertwined in my family dynamics. So I can't just look at the family system without looking at racism, without looking at sexism. They are intertwined. And when I talked about the healing, what healing, trauma healing looks like at an individual level, it's very different at a collective level. You cannot heal racism in psychotherapy. I'm going to say it again. You cannot heal racism in psychotherapy. You cannot heal sexism in psychotherapy. These are systems. And often I use this example. If I had a cut, let's say this trauma was a cut of an incident, right? It's going to heal. My skin is going to form granulation tissue. I'm going to get a scab, right? And I heal. But what if the knife keeps cutting me over and over and over again while I'm trying to heal? How am I healing? The knife needs to stop cutting me in order for me to heal. The knife needs to stop cutting me in order for me to heal. So I need to be liberated to heal. So healing and liberation must go hand in hand. And this is one of the things that is very core to my own work with my own organization, Lumos Transforms, and core to my work with Embody Lab, is that we talk about the individual and the collective and the systems and the intersections. We heal and we get free together. Okay. So if that's what healing involves, and we know just telling our story without extra resources can definitely be re-traumatizing in the re-experiencing and all the other dynamics that I talked about, how do we move from one to the other? What are the steps? And I think this is really important, is that if we can see the horizon, how do we get there? One is we need to develop some self-awareness, right? The ability to what is called interocept, to feel into ourselves, but to do it in a safe and measured way, in a gentle way. It's not just, hey, drop you in and you feel all the things. I don't know, I think it was maybe like 2016, 2017, I was invited in to work at a school for pregnant and parenting teenagers. And this school said, we're going to be trauma informed. We're going to do yoga and we're going to do mindfulness and look at us. And when they did that with these girls, and I mean girls, and they're not even young women, they were girls, the girls stopped coming to school because it dropped them too quickly into their bodies because it was not trauma informed. So they brought me in the next year and we applied the resilience toolkit with these girls, which has this process, right, of choice and it was truly trauma informed, to gently learn to interocept into the body at a pace, right, that can be metabolized. And in that way, the girls loved coming to school and their grades improved and they made all kinds of changes in their lives. So it's developing this kind of self-awareness, and it's also in this process, what happens is it's really important to discern the utility of your responses. Are your responses useful for the moment? Because often we may still be living in traumatic circumstances in a toxic workplace, with an abusive partner, in a family system, in a culture where it is not safe. And so a lot of times we may still have some hypervigilance, we may still have some responses, right, that are still protective. And I never want to demonize somebody for or pathologize a protective response. And so it's really important and to help restore that sense of self-agency that is lost in trauma. We are out of control. We're not able to have this a sense of power to say, you know what, I'm going in and being able to say, you know what, me being like this right now is really protective for me, and to not pathologize it. So going back to that specific program, because it's top of mind right now with those pregnant and parenting teens, that there was one girl, when she would do a practice and she would start to settle, she said, oh, I don't like this at all. No. And I remember saying to her, that's great. You recognized that relaxing, right, doesn't feel good to you. And you made a choice to stop, right? So restoring a sense of self-agency for her, and she still would come. She would come every week. And she would just dip her toe in, being able to discern for herself, is this a useful response or not, right? And we started to see a about 6 weeks into the program, she had so much energy, boom, because she was coming out of a freeze or collapse state and she was coming into, right, all of this charge in her body. And a couple weeks after that, she was able to report that she was living with somebody who was abusing her. So her, right? So here, if we demand that somebody settle, right, feel into themselves and settle, it was not appropriate for her to settle anymore. She needed to maintain that vigilance because she was living in an unsafe situation. She was able to report and she was able to be removed to a safer location. Okay. And so using, right, and in that way, she was able, right, to start healing. We had to liberate her first to do the healing. So it had to be slow and it had to be measured. So what we're looking at is a phased process. It is a phased process of preparation to tell the story, that she needed about 8 weeks to tell a story that was in real time. She needed 8 weeks. This just happened to be in this situation. And what did we do in those 8 weeks? I was doing this process of very gently, what those same guiding questions that I used with you all. What is your state? And starting to feel in, oh, I feel a little this, I feel a little that, a little psychoeducation to understand what your state might mean. To ask the question, is it useful for me right now? If it is, you're doing it intentionally, not unconsciously. If it's not useful, could you use a practice and settle in real time, just a little bit? We don't want a dramatic. This is not about dramatically, because if you dramatically settle, you can be flooded with. And then the ability to discern, is this working for me or not? And so when folks do this over time and they develop some self-awareness, more self-awareness, this gentle settling, right? Not only do we learn how the skills to tolerate or to work with high intensity, we learn the skills to self-settle. So when we go in to tell the story and we become activated, guess what? We have new resources. We have more knowledge, we have more skills, and we have the ability to settle so we can tell the story without re-experiencing. We have built up that skill set. Yeah. But more than that, in that process of doing this, we are also start to become aware because it's not just us in a vacuum. It's that question, is this response useful for me right now in this situation? I start to really look at this situation. Might this situation be harmful for me? And in what way? And we start to develop the capacity to perhaps change the situation or leave the situation. So we're looking at the combination of preparing to tell our stories in healing and preparing to liberate ourselves, growing capacity to liberate ourselves. I'm very interested when I develop science. I'm interested in the kind of resilience that and bandwidth for us to heal. And so I use this definition of, we call it alchemical resilience. Alchemical resilience. I'm going to put it in the chat. Put this in the chat. Alchemical resilience is the flexible strength and increased capacity to heal, to overcome adversity, and to change systems of inequity and oppression into places where we thrive. This is the kind of healing I'm interested in. So when we go back to that drowning metaphor, when you're drowning and you're feeling overwhelmed in trauma, just this idea, if I just vomit it out the story, I'm still drowning. Maybe I'm drowning deeper, right? I'm deeper in the water. Instead, how do I learn to get myself to shore? And then how do I learn how to, so I can go back in that water and repattern it? I can still, right, and calm the turbulence. Before I take some questions, because there's a lot in that chat, and I want to take some questions live orally too. I'd like to invite a little bit of a reflection. I've been talking a lot, and you may have been reflecting, but I want to make space for this in a very intentional way. And when I say, and Oyami, maybe you can do a little music when we do this reflection. Just so when I say reflection, often we say, I'm going to think about something, right? Do you notice how we give preference to the thought and not just to the body? So for here, I'm going to invite you to think, to feel, maybe to draw or write, maybe to move your body is the way that you reflect. Maybe it's to vocalize or make music. Once I invited reflection and somebody drummed. It was beautiful. You're muted. You can make the sounds. You can turn your camera off if you want to move. And I have a few questions for you to reflect on. You can reflect on one or all three, and we'll spend about 4 minutes or so and have Oyami put some music on. I'm going to both say the questions and put them in the chat. The first question is, when do you feel the seductive or power or gravitational pull to tell your own story? When does that happen for you? Or when does it happen that you to listen to someone else? So noticing, when is that occurring for me? That seduction, that gravitational pull, that compulsion to tell my story or listen to someone else's. 2, what resources do you pull in to prevent re-experiencing? Or what resources do you offer to someone else if you work with other people? Or you're just a friend, right? A family member to another person around their story. And the third, how might you support yourself to better resource yourself or someone else in the telling of the story? They're in the chat. When do you feel the compulsion to tell or listen? Observe. What resources do you pull in for yourself? And how might you support yourself better? What knowledge, what skills, what actions to support yourself or others? This is just a reflection for you. Oyami, do you want to put some music on? And we'll do about 3-4 minutes. We'll go to the hour and then we'll do questions for the last 15. And I'll take this time to review some of your questions. gently wrap up that reflection. Gently wrap up that reflection. And end the music. Yummy. Thank you. Ooh, y'all got some good questions in there. I think we could be doing this all day. um, I hope that reflection was useful for you. And I saw some private questions come in saying about, well, how do we do the last two? How do we resource ourselves? How, right? Um, this is exactly, I think, the work that we do at Embody Lab. It's the work I do at Lumos that is developing that set. I mean, I developed the resilience toolkit specifically. There are beautiful methods for sort of the telling the story part of the trauma, but I saw a real need to help people prepare for trauma healing, whether that's individual or collective, to develop a set of resources. That was my exact intent. While I do specific trauma healing, the story part with folks and organizations as they repattern themselves and collectives of people, recognized a broad need for that support. And that's why I created the resilience toolkit. So, I mean, I can't teach it in this amount of time. But that is what I use. And there are I think other methods are being developed. It's what we do at Embody Lab. I want to take a few questions live. So if you'd like to ask a question live, go ahead and raise your hand at the bottom ribbon. Please, it is for questions and not comments, right? So be really clear that you have a question about the content versus a share or a comment. And I'm going to, in the meantime, while people are raising their hands, I'm going to answer some questions that are in the Q&A. Manisha asked, is the re-experiencing or re-traumatizing the same if you write out the story? Yes, it can be the same in the writing and in the telling. And the real question for you is, this is a question for you in discernment. I don't know you. I don't know your story or your experience. It's for you as whether you're saying it out loud or writing it. Are you re-experiencing it? Are you having the somatic symptoms? Are you feeling like it's happening in real time as you're writing it? Then yes, it can be re-traumatizing. And the questions are, again, what are your resources that help you? Sometimes it's just, for example, the resource might be the capacity to slow down and maybe only write out 1 or 2 sentences. And that's it. And then that's enough. You have enough feeling. Where are you holding it? How are you holding it? Are you ready? Is that it? And then you can do a little bit more. Maybe that's all. You write 2 sentences and that's all you can do for the week. Slowing it down might be one of the resources needed. Hopefully that's helpful, Manisha. Julia asks, how does this idea of re-experiencing work with treatment modalities such as EMDR? EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a very trauma, it's meant for treating trauma. And okay, so they say, Julia says, where the whole point seems to be the re-experiencing. I am currently working with a therapist doing EMDR, and I wonder sometimes if it's too much, not being handled the way it should be. How do you know when it is time appropriate to re-experience? Thank you. Julia, your question is so important. EMDR, the beginning of EMDR, the time is supposed to be spent resourcing, helping you connect to resources of safety and stability first. And sometimes resourcing might take months and months and months, sometimes even longer, before you even get to doing the actual eye movements or the sound or the tapping, whatever it is. And sometimes clinicians may be new and they don't realize how much resourcing is needed and they may rush the process. It may be a financial thing or an insurance thing that there's not enough space to do that, and it's moving too fast. So if you're walking out of therapy sessions feeling wrecked, it's too fast. Slow it down. And you can say that this is feeling too fast, like to have a conversation with your therapist to say, this feels too fast. I think I need to slow it down. I'm now having nightmares. I'm having flashbacks during the week. It feels like it's getting worse and not better. Yeah. And someone else asked about exposure therapy. Same thing. Not a fan because of it. It's where are the new resources? What about the pacing? Okay, so let's take a hand, someone live, and Oyemi, Lori, if you want to, we're going to unmute you now, Lori Ford, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you. I think you've answered some of it, because it was going to be, about what if you're in a session, you don't know, at that point when you have somebody new, how, much experience they've had with it until you get to know them. So I think you've just answered that. What can you do as a resource for, say, like a friend that certainly wouldn't be a therapist, but would trigger something? What can you do so that you're not just triggered, but you're not just, like, say, in a restaurant, get up and run to the restroom, to get away from, what is happening? Is it appropriate to say to them as well, hey, I need you to slow down? How would you get that across to somebody?
That's a great question. So what I will do if someone is telling a story and I notice it looks like they're re-experiencing it, I will interrupt. And I will interrupt, and the words that I say is, I'm going to pause you right now because I can tell you're becoming distressed and I care for you. The story you're saying is so important and needs to be told. And I don't want you to be hurt when you tell it. So I'm going to repeat that again. I think this is a good set of, you can adapt it to your own self. But your question is great, Lori. And hopefully this is something that we can take as a practice with everybody, not just as professionals, just as a friend, as a sister, as a whoever you are, right? Your relationship. I'm going to pause you because I can see you're becoming distressed in telling this story. And I care for you. Your story is so important. And do you hear? I didn't say but, I said and. I don't want you to be hurt in the retelling of it. Can we take a break? And sometimes just that, right? You being calm and saying that to somebody, they can just, from wherever they were, can come down a bit. Maybe they do go get a glass of water. Maybe they stand up and move their body a little bit. Maybe it's a hug, depending on your relationship with the person. And then they can pick up the story again, right? So because in that moment, you are a resource, and the resource of time, of slowing it down, may actually a healing time to tell the story instead of a re-experiencing time. Is that helpful, Lori?
That's perfect, because it also answers the question, if you're on the opposite end and you're being traumatized by the way they're asking you questions or grilling you for questions, you can say, I need to take a pause. This is re-traumatizing me. This is triggering me, and I know you're trying to be supportive, but it's not having that effect right now. So yes, you've answered both sides of the coin. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Lori. Lydia, take a question from Lydia McCartney. You want to unmute yourself? And I'd love to hear your question.
Hi. So one of the resources I read in training was a book around trauma-centered psychotherapy. In that book, it talks a lot about going into almost every detail of the traumatic experience and using that as a way to almost charge the trauma out of the body. Listening to what you've said today, would you recommend that as helpful?
No,
What would be your advice on that?
no,
Okay.
I don't recommend it as helpful. Uh, you know, um, people can heal. Again, we have sort of like a very mechanistic view. It's like as if I can just get out the charge. It just doesn't work that way in my experience. I wish it did. I think we'd be in a lot better state. And there's many traumas where we might not even remember the details and we can still heal from them and we can still repattern them. I think the point is slowing things down, addressing pace, noticing if somebody's becoming overwhelmed. Them becoming overwhelmed again is not useful. So if you're like, I must get the details, I must get the details, are you even paying attention to, is this person becoming overwhelmed? Sometimes it takes months or longer to tell a story if it's very severe, especially if talking about very early childhood trauma that can be super overwhelming. So slowing it down, not forcing details. I don't take trauma histories right away from my clients because I often find they're not resourced enough to tell the story. I believe it'll come out in time. We don't have to push it. We don't have to push it at all. Again, notice if that compulsion to move quickly, that often is trauma active in you as well as a provider. I want to address, Swarna has a question in the Q&A. What, in your opinion, is the difference between trauma pornography and raising awareness in social media events, etc.? Notice if there is, often it's egregious. It's actually what Lydia just asked about details. What is our goal? If we're trying to raise awareness, are we trying to do that by arousing a stress response in people, telling them how bad it is and really getting in with that nitty gritty? Like if that is our goal, watch if that's the goal, because then they're going to click, they're going to donate, they're going to do whatever the thing is how do we tell? If we are telling the story with that impulse, there is a problem that we're moving toward. To check, right? To maybe do a test with a smaller, like if you're doing something in that way, test it with a small group of people and notice, is this right? Is this charging it, right? How can we tell the story in a way that is raises awareness without the egregious details? Because are we trying to garner support? And if we're trying to do that through, again, like almost a trauma bond here with the audience. How do you tell the story in a measured way, right? So maybe you say if something's activating, then you talk about a resource afterwards. So you tell a difficult part of the story and then a positive part of the story, a difficult part of the story and a positive part of the story. That's another way that can tell that it's not an emphasis on, again, just arousing people, literally trying to arouse people. I think we're at time. Oh my God, there's so many great questions. Okay. Well, I hope to be with all of you at some later date and we get to do some deep dives on this. Oyemi, I'm going to hand it over to you. I just want to thank everybody so much for your attention and connection and your offer of shares and questions. Oyemi?
Thank you, Nkem. I told you guys at the beginning, be prepared to be mind blown because Nkem is quite amazing. And thank you so much, Nkem. Bye, guys. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful one.
Mm-hmm.